Hi, this is Betty with Beyond the Dalit. Well, it's getting to be that time of year again when we're coming up on the holidays. Um, we've just gone through the end of the season, or really the beginning of the season, holidays on the Hebraic calendar um, of the month of Tishri, the head of the year. So it's the beginning of the new Hebraic year, 5786. So we're in the year that's connected with the Hebrew letter Vav, which represents the number six. Kind of looks like a tent peg. Um, and now we're coming up on the end of the year holidays, Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Christmas, those things. And of course our New Year. And it's usually during this time of the year, because I follow both calendars. It can be disruptive, okay? Because I'm beginning a new year usually like in September, but then there's the January New Year that's coming, and it's not like, well, gee, God only looks at one calendar. And if you can only follow the Hebraic calendar if you want to be in step with God. Well, I've heard that. I've heard people teach that, and I will say. I don't fully agree with that statement, although I do to a point. And I thought I would take some time today to talk about that, to talk about this, the balance of living with two different calendars. Um, and the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of trying to keep time in two different systems, um, what comes to mind is when I was living in Virginia. I now live, I was in Virginia for 3 years and staying with my folks at the end of their life, and spent the last 3 years with my stepmom after my dad passed, and didn't want to remove her from. She was in her 90s. I didn't want to take her out of her house and all that, so I went and stayed with her until she was gone. And not that anybody cares about all of that. That's just the setting and the reason I was there. And now I'm back in Illinois. So I'm a Midwesterner. Um, I love the Midwest. I do. I absolutely love it here. There's not a lot of really good things to say about the state of Illinois, except this is where I was born. I'm born and raised in Chicago. When my folks retired, my dad is originally from West Virginia, very small mountain town in West Virginia. And when he retired, he moved to the state of Virginia. And so when him and my stepmom moved, they moved to a different time zone. Okay. My dad, very self focused individual, the time difference just never really. And then my dad was older. Okay. He was in his mid to late 80s when he passed. So, and they had lived there for, gosh, I want to say over 20 years. They spent really the bulk of their retirement they spent in Virginia. And 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 the time difference never really hit my dad. Never really occurred to him when my phone would ring at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it would be my dad. And he's already been up like for a while, okay? And it's an hour ahead there. Well, what are you doing still in the rack? It's 6 o'clock in the morning, Dad. Okay? I'm still in the rack. Now, okay, I know you're probably thinking, what the heck does that have to do with following either the Hebraic calendar or the Gregorian calendar? I'm just saying, It's not easy to follow two different time zones at the same time. My brother, my older brother, I love him to pieces. And he has moved. He was here in Illinois, and now he lives in Tennessee, and he is in the Eastern time zone, where I'm in the Central time zone. Oh, again, he's an hour ahead. My brother will often forget that he's an hour ahead. He forgets about the time difference when he calls, and there will be on occasion a 6 a.m. call, because my brother, very much like my dad, is an early riser, and he's got half of his day is done by the time it's 9 o'clock my time. So, you know, living in these two different places um can sometimes be a challenge. So when I'm thinking about the Hebraic calendar versus the Gregorian calendar, what I try to do is, first of all, is just simply relax and not take it so seriously, because I know some people do. And I don't mean to offend anybody. This isn't, if this is something you feel very passionate about, and it's something you're striving toward, God bless you. You know, um, that's not me. Okay. At the same time, if you follow my blog on any level, you know that I'm very focused on this stuff. So, but I have had to figure out a way to incorporate both things into my life and find a rhythm. Okay. So, for those of you who are a little bit who are not quite familiar with the Hebraic calendar, the Hebraic calendar is what you call it's not just a lunar calendar, it is a solar lunar calendar. So, the simplest way to convey this is that the years are follow the solar, okay? They're measured by the sun, okay? The months, on the other hand, are lunar in that they follow the cycles of the moon, okay? So each new moon is a new month, okay? So when when God told Moses, "Your months begin now," God was setting up an order for following the monthly cycle. The years are counted differently, okay? So when God told Moses, "Your months begin now," this was the month in the Old Testament. It was known as the month of Aviv. Now we call it the month of Nisan. Okay, it's the month of Passover. Okay, so God was saying, start counting your months from here. Okay, um, so you had the months that begin with the month of Nisan, which is the first month. Then you have the month of Iyar, which is the second month, and then you have Sivan, which is the third month, and so on and so on. And then the years are counted from the month of Tishri. Now, Tishri is technically the seventh month. Okay? So, I have to be honest with you. I hate, I really don't, I hate having to explain it, because as soon as I start explaining it, I go, is there really a reason we have to go through all of this? Because it just seems so confusing. Okay? But once you kind of get the hang of it, it's not so bad. Okay. So here's the thing. Technically, in my opinion, it's so much easier to ignore it. Okay. But I learned something. And what I learned was that there's something to it. in in I'm just going to say it this way, in recognizing that it exists. Okay? That the cycle exists, the way it exists. And once we understand the cycle of it, it becomes easier to follow. So I stopped trying to figure out and memorize the names of the months and how to calculate things. Once I threw that part out, or let's say ignored that part, and just simply looked at the cycles, and I went, okay, here's the thing. Genesis 1, God begins the cycle. Okay? You have evening and morning, day 1. Evening and morning, day 2. Evening and morning, day 3. There's a cycle going on here. There's a repetitive cycle. From Genesis 1:1 on, you have a cycle going on. Okay? You get to the end of Genesis 1, and you have day 7. Okay? You have day 6 is over. Day 7 is a Shabbat. It is a time of rest. God finished his work in 6 days, and on the seventh day, he rested. Now we've gone from the cycle of the day, which is evening and morning, understanding that the day begins at sundown. Okay, so we're going from sundown to sundown. Okay, now there's the cycle of the day. For most of us, we start our day when our alarm clock goes off in the morning. What we don't realize is that this isn't just about being biblical. It's about understanding the cycles that God created. So these are the created cycles, okay? God created cycles. When I saw that and went, oh, okay, hold on. If I want to be in rhythm, if I want to get into step, let's say, and kind of get more into harmony with the cadence of God's creation, okay, that was kind of the way I approached it. Was okay, then my day begins. The new day begins at sundown, and my day begins with rest. It actually begins with entering into enjoyment and rest and recuperation and 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 getting recharged. It's evening for me is usually the time when I'm hanging out with family. I'm you know I don't I'm an old lady now, so I don't go out so much in the evening like a lot of young people do. But my activities are different in the evening than they are in the daytime. The daytime, for me, that's time to work. But the evening and the nighttime, that's a time to rest. It's a time to focus on myself, what I need. I'm making dinner. I'm hanging out with family. I'm reading books. I'm just relaxing. I'm doing what I enjoy. Okay? So it's a little bit of a mental shift. But when I went, oh wow, okay, so evening time is the beginning. This is how I'm preparing for the new day. This is how my day starts, with preparing for the day. Then I go to bed, which again is part of my preparation for the day. When I get up in the morning, it's not a new day, it's the middle of the day. Yeah, it took me a while. I have to be honest with you. You know, because I'm retired, I don't set an alarm clock anymore, but I'm still a fairly early riser. You know, I love daytime. I do. But because I love daytime And I love getting things accomplished in those early morning hours. I'll start preparing for that the night before. Now, I'm an old lady. I can do things differently than people who are still raising their families and people who are working jobs and all of that. So I get it. This isn't for everybody. Okay? It's not. But just to if you can take away what what Holy Spirit highlights to you in what I'm sharing, that's great. Okay? When I made the shift of going, my evening and nighttime is how I'm choosing to prepare myself for the remainder of the day. Okay, then my outlook on the day changes. So now during daylight hours, these are my work hours. I get up in the morning, I have a whole morning routine I do, and then I get to work and I work for a number of hours on the stuff I want to work and focus on and all of that, whatever that looks like in retirement. Okay, I'm not just sitting here doing nothing all day. And then we start, and then the day ends with having accomplished what I set out to do and what I prepared for the night before. So, and I'm a journaler, so I'll sit at the end of the day, I'll stop and I'll journal a bit about the day. Um, and I do try to keep it simple. I try to keep it light. I try not to get too bogged down with that. I might jot a few things down and what I accomplished and what I felt was, you can call it, hey, what was the one thing I would call a win for the day? What was the one thing I really felt good about getting finished with and getting accomplished? And and at that time, so I'll do it's almost like a daily check-in with myself to go, how, what worked and what didn't. What can I do? And then I'll stop and go, okay, now what can I do as I'm ending this day and I still have some wherewithal? Um, what can I do to best prepare for what I want to accomplish tomorrow? So I'll sit with that and I make my decisions at that point. And and so for me, it's a rhythm, it's a cadence, it's it's evening and morning. It's starting my day. So I'm really by the time, and now sundown's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Thank you very much. So I don't adhere strictly to that. That's the thing I really want you to hear in the midst of this. This isn't about, oh, gee, you got to do what I'm doing. I'm sharing what I do to hopefully help you to realize that there's not one way to do this. There's really no, and the more we try to get religious about it, the less we're really walking with the Spirit. So I don't like to put parameters on things because I believe God is bigger than that. God is bigger than being kosher. God is bigger than all the religious um traps that we put, all the restrictions that we put on things. So anyway, I don't want to go down that path or I'll get off too far and then I won't be able to finish what I'm talking about. And then each week is kind of the same thing. So it's you get to the end of the week and you have that. So now this this last day of the week, this seventh day, whatever that looks like for you, um, is again a day of rest. And and that means something different for all of us. For me, getting a day of rest, again, I'm retired. I don't have daily, I don't have a job I have to get up and go to. Um, I have things I like to accomplish. I have projects I'm working on, and I do put a lot of work into writing blogs and making podcasts and things like that. and that's a lot of work. And anybody who's done that work knows that's not a 15-minute thing, you know. There's a lot of work that goes in to keeping it and maintaining it and all of that. Um, at the same time, um, I have time to do it. Okay. Um, okay. So back. Sorry for getting distracted. Okay. So here's the thing. When you get into the cycle and you start to find a rhythm that works for you, I think that's really more the key in realizing what can you do to prepare for your day in the evening, to prepare the night before. What I have found is that when I started to do that and I changed my focus, I wasn't scrambling in the morning anymore. Now, that's not just since I retired, because I've raised a family. I had to get up and go to work and raise 4 kids on my own. Okay. So I know what it's like to be busy and to not have 5 minutes to yourself. I get that. Okay. Um, my point is there are things that we can do to prepare for what's coming. And I find a lot of time what I realized for myself was that the more prepared I was, the more I had thought it through ahead of time, the more I made just really sat down with my calendar and realized what I had to do and how much time it was going to take me to accomplish that. I began to realize that, hey, throwing this stuff on a schedule really helps. It helped me a lot. It did. And even though, like I said, even though I'm retired, I still keep a schedule. Now, there's a lot of different stuff on there than there was when I was raising my kids, okay? And having to work every day and how I've had to juggle that schedule. And the point I'm making is this. I'm looking for quality of life, okay? And I want that for you as much as I want it for myself. I want you to be able to now this isn't about accomplishing more. It really isn't about trying to get more stuff done. If you're just trying to get more stuff done, you're going to have to take a look at your life. Because if 24 hours are not enough hours to get done what you need to get done, and I get it when there's times in our lives when that's true and there just aren't enough hours in the day. I'm one person, going back to being a single mom, there just simply weren't enough hours in the day to get all the jobs done that needed to get done. And that was but one of the things I really had to take a look at was I was burning myself out. And I got burned out, and because I was so burned out, um I was just I was just snarly and snappy and angry and bitter, and my quality of life was just in the toilet. I mean, I was stressed out all the time. I was meeting myself coming and going. And it wasn't about, oh, well, gee, I got onto the Hebraic calendar and that changed my life. No, it didn't. Scheduling things helped to manage my life. But I had to make some decisions. And the decisions I had to make, really, for me, in a lot of ways, it was hard to make some of those decisions because what I realized I was doing was because I was so overworked and so frazzled and so stressed all the time, I was always looking for ways to manage the stress rather than managing what was causing the stress. Now, I have 4 sons, um, all of which were a challenge on multiple levels. We'll leave it there. Um, Thankfully, I had some help. I had a little bit of help. But that help came at a cost. And I still had to work a job in order to support my family. And not being able to be home and manage my family the way that I wanted to really created other issues. So I had to take a look at how much time I was spending away from my family and go, well, if I want to spend time with my kids, then I need to actually do that and not just think about it or not just talk about it or not just wish I could do that. I actually had to do it. And the only way that I could do that was really because I was so pressed on every side. I had to start scheduling it in. And I did, and one of the things that became a thing for us as a family was dinner time, you know. And what I'm trying to get at here is when we walk in step with the cycles, okay? When we when we do that, it begins to regulate something within us internally. Now, I'm sure some science person can tell you what that's all about, or some psychiatrist or psychologist or whatever can explain what's going on in the brain. I can't do that. But what I can tell you is this. My life was out of control. My schedule was a mess, and everything in life felt like it was out of my grip. Like I couldn't manage anything, and I had to take a big step back. And what I began to realize was the more I took control over my schedule and how I was showing up in that and how I was holding myself responsible for walking that out and adhering to the schedule that I created, okay, I began to realize that there was something about the rhythm. We started doing, a family night and there were these cycles that really built something in us, I remember the first time I was at my oldest son's house and they were sitting around the table and they were serving dinner. And before dinner started, much to my surprise, they stopped and they prayed before dinner. I didn't expect them to do that, but they did. And I'm like, because that was our practice. That was what we did. We stop and you pray before dinner. And and it's not something. It's like, oh my God, you can't eat if you don't pray. It's like, oh my God, that's you've sinned against God. No, it was a practice. It was something that was implemented in our home as my kids were growing up. Okay. And what I realized later was that what little bit I could do with my schedule really created some structure that we otherwise would not have had. The simple little pieces will stay with us longer than I think. We don't give it as much value. We don't look at the little things and see them as being valuable. But a simple thing like keeping a schedule and going, okay, well, you know what? Every Sunday morning I'm going to get up and go, you know, I'm just going to get up and get out of the house and I'm going to go for coffee. I'm going to take myself for coffee. I'm going to get a book and I'm going to go sit somewhere and I'm going to read for a while. Just doing that. And the religious people in the group are freaking out because I'm going for coffee instead of going to church. So chew on that one for a while. Um, you got to do you. You got to do you. I'll be honest with you. I do my whatever church thing I do it all online. And because I do it online, I have the freedom to do that whenever I want. Because I can go back and replay the service from Sunday. I can do it on Tuesday morning. Isn't that incredible? I love that I can do that because now I'm not. The schedule's not controlling me. I control the schedule. And that was the piece that was like, oh my God, this was such a revelation for me. It was such a big deal for me. I'm like, now I don't have to force myself to try to do something because I feel religiously obligated to do it. I don't feel religiously obligated to do anything anymore. I always felt like, oh my God, if I don't start my day every day with prayer and Bible reading, I have screwed up. And now, oh my God, my day is going to be a mess and this isn't going to be good now and something's going to go wrong. And it's like, lighten up. When I realized that the day really begins the night before, like, I got this. Okay. So at the end of the end of the daylight, and we start to go into what is now the new cycle, which is when the sun is going down, I can now very relaxingly, I can read the word if I want. I can listen to a message. I can I can spend some time in prayer. I can, whatever that looks like, if I want to. If I want to. I don't have to be tied to the obligations. And I don't know that I could really convey that as 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 importantly as with as much as importance as I think there is to it, is that I think we really need to be freed up from what we perceive to be obligations. Because the only obligation I have in my relationship with God is to love God with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength. And I do. But what I refuse to do is to adhere to someone else's version of that. I refuse to comply with some kind of religious structure that's been put around that, because that's the piece that trips us up. So when it comes to whether we adhere to the Hebraic calendar or we don't, in my mind, a lot of it's irrelevant. But what I do know is there is tremendous value in being in step with the cycle, with the rhythm of the cycles. So when it comes to the new moon, okay, and now each new moon we start this. Now it's not only a new moon, it's a new month, okay? And I don't have to memorize all this stuff, okay? I just have to recognize this is a new month. Now, from a, let's call it a prophetic or slash spiritual perspective, there are some revelatory slash prophetic things that are associated with each month, and you can get into those or not get into that. It doesn't matter. But when we recognize that with each new month, we're starting a new cycle, and there's something that Holy Spirit is highlighting. There's something about that particular month that I'm trying to think of exactly how I want to convey this, because again, I don't want to I don't want to shove us into any kind of a format that, or structure that God didn't do. Okay? There's a lot of stuff that's out there on following what's called Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is the Hebrew way of saying new moon, okay, or new month, okay? That's all that is. And I love following the months. I do. Probably even more so than following what is prophetically significant about each year. But here's what I've learned about how the Spirit of the Lord is moving. There are different ways that, or focuses, let's say, that are probably more predominant during certain months than at other times. But the same is true in our Gregorian calendar. So we're in the month of November. Well, as Americans, what are we looking at in the month of November? It's always going to be Thanksgiving. We've just come through, now, excuse me, not my favorite Americanized holiday of Halloween, but it's a big deal in the United States. In some areas more than others. And I live in an area where it's very much a deal. So coming out, I mean, people decorate now. I mean, let's face it, it's everything has been commercialized. So it's the commercialization of what I'm referring to rather than the observance of it. Okay. Um, we've just come through that October thing. Now, coming into November, the focus now shifts, and now where's our focus for the month of November? It's almost in almost every household. It's Thanksgiving. You know, we're in the fall season. This is one of my favorite times of the year, not just because of Thanksgiving, although I love to get together with people and eat. It's like that is like if you were to ask me what my absolute favorite activity is, it's going to be to get with people and eat. That's my favorite thing to do is eating and conversation, and that's my favorite. So Thanksgiving and going through the holidays, favorite time of the year, not because it's the holidays, but because of the social engagement that's there that isn't otherwise there the rest of the year. Okay, so having said all that, um, so for those of us who are just looking at the Gregorian calendar, we have these times of year, they're filled with, it's full of meaning. You know, I have my brother is I have a lot of respect for my older brother Steve. He facilitates a group in his area. He's in Tennessee, and he works a lot with veterans. He's a vet himself, and he has they have an organization called Veterans Coffee Fellowship, and it is, in my opinion, it's fantastic. He just loves what he does, and it's just a group of vets get together and they do coffee, and then they do some outreach stuff and whatnot, and they're always reaching out to other vets, and I honor that. Well, this time of the year, at the beginning part of November, so from the last part of October through the first week or so of November, getting to, especially around Veterans Day. So right around this time, he's a super busy guy, and there's always stuff that's going on, and he's super involved, and it's very meaningful. And I know one of the things my brother did um, just a few months back was he was able to go on an honor flight with a group, and and he was able to accompany an older vet on the trip, and it's something that's extremely meaningful for him. So he had a wonderful time, and at the same time it that so for a lot of people, and I mention that just to say, number one, I love my brother and I can't talk about him enough, but um but that time of year holds a lot of meaning for a lot of people. You know, there's a lot around that holds a focus, just like 4th of July, okay? There's there's meaning in it. It's not just a day where the schools are closed and the bank's not open, it's not just about that, okay? Um, there's meaning behind it. So we start out the month of November with Veterans Day, and then we also have this very meaningful family day of Thanksgiving, of coming together with family and friends, and a day of gratitude and reflecting on what we've been grateful for during this past year. it's a month full of meaning. Then we shift into December and we have Christmas, which, I mean, whether you're religious or not, Christmas is typically a very meaningful time of year for a lot of people, regardless of their religious beliefs. Okay? So, again, there's a lot of depth of meaning for people within the events that happen on the calendar. When we're looking at the Hebraic calendar, we're not just looking at Jewish festivals. And I think that's the piece that is one of the things I think we can't stress enough. While there's history there that is connected with the Jewish people, it goes deeper than that, because it's about the people who were called out to walk with God. And that's really what this is about, because they were the original called out ones. They were the original ecclesia. The Greek word ecclesia is the called out assembly. Basically, that's what that word means. So the original called out assembly were the Hebrew people, starting with Abraham, and Abraham becomes the first Hebrew. And that word, again, that Hebrew word means to cross over. It means to come out, to cross over. Abraham was the first one, and then, coming through and getting to Moses, you have this group of people, again, that are brought out. They're brought out. Now they're not just brought out of a way of life. They're being brought out of slavery. They're being brought out of bondage. And so they're delivered from that, and that itself is striking and amazing and wonderful, and all of that. But there's so much more richness that goes with this, because when we shift our focus off of this is the Jews, this is just for the Jewish people, and go, no, this was for the called out ones. This is, if we look through Scripture and we go back, they were the ones who were the first called out ones. They were the first ecclesia. When we frame it like that, which is what I did, I was able to look at this from a different perspective and go, this is a part of my history as a believer. Because if I believe myself to be a part of the New Testament ecclesia, Paul said to the Jew first and also to the Greek, meaning this isn't just for the Jewish people, but it's also for non-Jews. For Jew and Gentile alike, this is about being a part of that called out community. And I identify myself in that way. So to me, it doesn't matter what our heritage is, how I identify with, was I born Jewish? Well, no, I wasn't. But I don't have to be. And as we go through and we read through the New Testament, what we begin to realize is that, we have been grafted in, as it were, by faith, because we are now seeds of Abraham. We are now descendants of Abraham by faith. So why? Because Abraham was the first called out one. As the first called out one, we now are, by faith, we are now joined and connected with Abraham. So all of the blessings of Abraham, all of everything that came down through that line is now ours as a result of what Jesus did. And then as we're all connected, we're now connected because of Jesus. Having said that, what on earth does that have to do with following the calendar? It's this. Just like the meaning that's there for us as Americans with Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and all that, and 4th of July, and our other American holidays that we celebrate and we observe on this Gregorian calendar. There are events that God said these are appointed times. So if you want to kind of put that in more modern vernacular, these are scheduled events on the calendar. These are times God set. These are special times to connect with God. So there's stuff God already put on the calendar, just like every year Thanksgiving's going to come up on the calendar. Every year Passover's going to come up on the calendar. Every year Shavuot, Pentecost, is going to come up on the calendar. Every year Rosh Hashanah, Feast of Trumpets, is going to come up on the calendar. Every year the Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is going to come up. Every year Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, it's going to come up. In each one of those has very special meaning associated with it. And even Hanukkah, which is not in the Old Testament but is in the New Testament, um, there's deep meaning that's associated with each one of those. And what I found fascinating was that, again, it wasn't about them being Jews, it was about them being the called out ones. And so as I look at the history and I look at the events, I try to the best of my ability to focus on it more from the perspective of these are the meaningful events for the called out ones. Then I look at that differently and go, okay, well, when does that show up? Well, Hanukkah is going to be the next event that shows up. On the Gregorian calendar, it begins on the evening of Sunday, December 14th. But what that looks like on the Hebraic calendar is that it begins on the 25th of Kislev and it runs through the second of the month of Tevet. Again, on the Gregorian calendar, it's December 14th through Monday the 22nd, okay? Which means it's the holiday of Hanukkah is going to culminate with the winter solstice, which makes it the shortest day of the year and the beginning of when the days start getting longer. Okay, um, just a happy little note that doesn't happen every year because of the way the Hebraic calendar is calculated. The days don't land on the same dates on the Gregorian calendar every year. They're always different. And, which sometimes Hanukkah falls in November. Sometimes Rosh Hashanah is in September, sometimes it's in October. Sometimes Passover is in March, sometimes it's in April. And I think it's interesting. To me, it's fascinating, okay? But when I started to just simply recognize that these times come up and that, and I can choose each year how I'm going to, or whether I'm going to observe that in some capacity. Again, there's no shackles here. There's no structure that is so firm on us that we have to do this a certain way. There isn't. Jesus said, the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. I take that same approach to all of these Hebraic holidays, all of these biblical observances and all of that. It's how am I choosing to show up in it? It's just like how am I choosing to show up every day um, with what responsibilities and that I have on my life. Okay. So if I want to be able to spend time with my granddaughter, which is my absolute favorite thing in the whole world to do, then I know I have to be rested because she's a handful. She's a child. Okay? She's a baby right now, thank goodness. But a day is going to come when she's going to be a toddler. And it's going to be even more of a challenge for me to keep up with her. Thankfully, she has parents who have that full time job, but I still want to be able to be a part of that. And in order for me to be a part of that, I have to plan for that. I have to make sure if that's something I value, then that's something I have to plan for and be prepared for, just like I plan and prepare for my day. I spend that time the night before planning and preparing for what's coming the next day, for what I already know is coming. Now, we can't plan for the unexpected, not in this respect. Okay? That's a whole different that's a whole different story. Okay? When we're looking at the calendar, it's great. Get a book. There's a bunch of books that are out there. They're all pretty basic. I would say get something pretty simple, you know, unless you're looking to really go deep into things and study stuff out and all of that, which I've done. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with looking at the prophetic implications of each month. There's nothing wrong with looking at the spiritual and prophetic implications of each year and what the letters represent and all. And if you follow me, that's my thing. That's what I do. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you not to do that. What I am going to say is don't feel like that's something you have to do. I think there's a lot more interest out there today than there ever was before, which I think is phenomenal. I think it's great. I think there's a lot of people that have been following the Hebraic year for a while, and I'm noticing that there's more attention now being given to Rosh Chodesh and what some communities refer to as first fruits. Um, and we'll talk about more of that in the days and months to come. But I hope that what I've shared today has been helpful on some level. So, just to reiterate, do this your way. You know, this isn't about following and adhering to and trying to memorize a calendar that throws us so far off of what we're already used to. There's a simple way of incorporating this into our lives. And we'll talk more about things like this, in blogs to come. But in the meantime, I just want to say I love your interest. I love that, for those of you that are trying to follow that stuff, like I said, there's a bunch of resources that are out there now. Um, there's some really simple things that are on, especially if you go, if you're an Amazon person, you know, there's um there's a bunch of stuff that's out there that's on the feasts and following the calendar and things like that. There's books galore everywhere. Okay, so I encourage you, find one. Google it. If you Google, it will come. Okay. I mean, there's, again, it's simple. This doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Okay. Um, I'm not changing my whole life to accommodate living religiously according to something that I don't feel I'm obligated to have to adhere to. But I love being in step with Holy Spirit. I love stepping into the rhythm of God's creation because there's there's just something about it that really you just have to experience. So I will leave you with that until next time. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. This has been Betty with Beyond the Dalit. Shalom.